Are local police using Flock license plate reader technology to spy on you? I'm Crystal Graham with Augusta Free Press, and we're breaking down the issue for you this week. A vocal group of citizens in Stanton have been speaking out regarding technology with Flock cameras that they're using in the city. The city of Stanton has 6 cameras, and they've been using them for about a year. Their contract is renewing right about now, so they're entering their second year of using the Flock cameras. Among the concerns is that it is a private company and that there have been quite a few missteps by users of the technology. Flock will tell you that maybe it's not exactly a backdoor access, but certainly the technology has been used in ways that it is not intended and that the law does not permit. Stanton resident Deborah Kushner has actually been one of the people speaking out against the technology to Stanton City Council. So far, most of the city council members, as well as the city manager, have pushed back, saying that this is for the greater good and that they trust the Stanton Police Department. The Stanton Police Department did walk me through the technology. We'll talk about that in just a minute. But the concerns from Kushner are valid, especially in an era which immigrants feel like they're being specifically targeted through Donald Trump and his agenda. That when you see cameras up along the roads, that's certainly a cause for concern, a reason for some people to feel like they're living in fear. And while Deborah Kushner so far hasn't gotten any traction as far as making changes in Stanton, there has been pushback in other localities like Charlottesville. And as a result of that, there have been they're still using flock technology, but they're limiting their use. And we'll talk about that as well in just a minute. But there are things that you can do, even if your location, even if your locality chooses to use the flock cameras, there are things that you can ask for that help protect you and help protect others as well. So we're going to break it down. We'll start with Flock in general. For people who aren't familiar with that, license plate reader technology has been around for decades, right? And police have utilized that. Flock is kind of the latest thing, and it's probably gotten a lot of attention in recent years. It's been around for less than a decade, probably about 8 years. Um, and there are 4,000 active flock cameras nationwide. Virginia, starting July 1st, had some new regulations that did go into place, and it does limit the ability to share the data. You can't share it outside of the state of Virginia, basically. You can't let other agencies in other states utilize the data that's being collected. But the way that flock cameras work is basically if you drive by a flock camera, your license plate, your vehicle, a picture of your vehicle is captured. Police aren't monitoring that real time or anything of that nature, but if there's a crime committed, if there's a kidnapping, if there's a stolen car, they can enter in the license plate or description of the vehicle, and they can basically find out basically if that vehicle has pinged anywhere on any of their cameras, which might give them a better idea of, how to locate that particular suspect. The way that it does kind of work a little bit more real time, from my understanding of the technology, is that there is what they call kind of like a hot list. And so if a vehicle was stolen, if someone was kidnapped or something like that, anywhere statewide, for those participating in the statewide network, then basically the license plate or the vehicle description would go into the system. And then if there was a ping that matched that, that information would get somehow sent to dispatch of police, and police could go out and either, look to locate that vehicle in that general vicinity. If it's a matching vehicle description, they can see if it's actually, the vehicle that's wanted. But it does give them some real-time capabilities in that sense on this hot list. And there's no denying that the technology has certainly helped police. I also talked with the Harrisonburg Police Department, who's had a lot of success with this. Everything from Stanton and Harrisonburg will both tell you everything from a U-Haul being stolen to a kidnapping case, even to homicides. They're often able to use the technology, retroactively, to be able to make a better case when someone's caught. And so the proponents of this would say that that the technology is for the greater good. The opponents of this would probably say that it feels like that we're surveilling the community as a whole instead of just targeting people who may have committed a crime. The ACLU, which is the American Civil Liberties Union, has been very vocal in their opposition to flock cameras for a variety of reasons, one of which the localities that I spoke with didn't seem to even know about, which is some newer AI technology or artificial intelligence technology that's being rolled out by the company in places, especially where there's more cameras. Like I said, in Stanton, they have 6 cameras, but in Harrisonburg, they have 30. And in cases like that, what this AI technology supposedly does is it can look at certain areas and almost create a profile. Like if a car goes to a certain area numerous times, and that area might be flagged as an area that's high in crime for one reason or another, then perhaps it can provide that data to police, and they can look at that. The the localities that I spoke with aren't utilizing that technology, didn't even know that technology exists, and maybe it's still in a rollout phase, but it is something that I believe is called the investigations manager, and so that's still in the works. The American Civil Liberties Union, though, said that they believe that the use of the cameras is definitely a violation of privacy, and there are things that you can do. They do encourage citizens to speak up if the flock cameras are in your community. Um, so a lot of times what happens, according to the ACLU, is that these cameras are kind of put up in communities without a lot of public discussion. And that's one thing that would be nice to be changed. But the public doesn't often get an opportunity to weigh in on this. In Stanton, for example, Stanton Police Chief Jim Williams gave a presentation to City Council about the time this rolled out last year in 2024. But since then, there's been no real public update regarding the technology, just basically that it's been renewed, and the cameras are pretty affordable. I think around $3,000 each in a community. So when you have 6 cameras, you're talking about $18,000 over the course of a year. In addition to be able to look at crime retroactively in Stanton, you can also search the database if you choose to, and if your locality chooses to, you're connected to this statewide network. So even if you're searching for a car that was stolen in Stanton, if it pings in Northern Virginia on a flock camera, you're going to get that information, and then you can work with those authorities to help basically get that vehicle back, or at least arrest the person who's driving that vehicle. So the presentation to city council, like I said, was about a year ago. And while residents like Deborah are speaking up against this, the basically the city council, the city manager they see no problem with the technology at all. The Stanton Police Department did take me through the technology. Jim Williams and his tech guru, I guess you could say, on the police department, Butch Shiflett, showed me how the technology works. And they kind of did that by putting in a license plate of one of their department vehicles and then showing me how that vehicle would come up if they did a retroactive search on it. So he obviously the vehicle belongs to Shiflett, or that's his company vehicle that he's assigned. He was there, so there was no retro. I mean, there was no real time pinging happening, but it did show where he had been in the city over the course of, we could look at data for up to 21 days, which is the Virginia law that went into effect on July 1st, that localities can hold the data for 21 days. Some localities have chosen to hold that data for less time. In Virginia, for example, Charlottesville, I believe, holds the data for 7 days instead of 21. That's one way that residents like Kushner can speak up and ask for perhaps some modifications. Just because there's a state law that says, that the maximum time that can be retained for is 21 days, you can get modifications to that. In fact, I believe it was the ACLU that told me, but research showed that some localities hold that data for as little as 3 hours. If you're trying to solve crime, the idea behind that is that you don't need to hold on to a bunch of unnecessary license plates and information on your residents, that you can go ahead and purge that data after 3 hours. I mentioned that Harrisonburg has 30 cameras, Stanton has 6 cameras, in Charlottesville they have 10 cameras. Augusta County, from what I could tell, has 2 cameras. Um, Sheriff Donald Smith acknowledged that they used the flock technology, but didn't really get back to me to have a discussion about that technology. Albemarle County and the city of Waynesboro do not use flock cameras, though Waynesboro admitted that they had used the license plate reader technology in the past, but to my knowledge, basically they say they're not using that either in the city of Waynesboro. So again, they kind of took me through this technology. You could enter a description, and this is one of the things that organizations like the ACLU don't really like. You can enter a bumper sticker, or you could enter, a dent on a vehicle or something like that beyond just the license plate, and then search that database to see if that vehicle would come up. What Stanton Police wanted me to see is that you can't just randomly search something. So the way that the protocols are put in place is that there is a field for a case number, and there's a field for what you're basically searching for. In this kind of technology is not supposed to be used for immigration enforcement, but there are thousands of cases nationwide, and in Virginia that have shown that people are putting immigration or ICE or something of that nature in that description field. The audits are done locally. And Flock will tell you that you can look at what people are searching for, like in Stanton, for example. Anyone can look at that. Like the Stanton Police Department can look at that and see, okay, well, what were people looking for? Again, when I spoke with Shiflett, he seemed to think, okay, well, we can look at that for our Stanton officers that are using the database, but not for others. So it may just be if that technology is available, as a Flock communications person tells me, that the localities just don't know how to use it. And that was the same answer that I basically got from Harrisonburg, which is that, they're responsible for auditing their own department. That information through that new Virginia kind of law is sent annually to the state. And I believe it's the Virginia State Police that then compiles that data and provides that data to the governor, to the General Assembly, and other government officials, basically, so that they can look at how that data is being used statewide. Um, so I guess the General Assembly does recognize that this technology is being used, and they are trying to put some safeguards in place for people in the state. Um, both Harrisonburg and Stanton, as I said, both kind of feel like this is the greater good, and residents expect us to be able to solve crimes, and this technology helps us do that. And when there is new technology, citizens expect them to have it. Even in Stanton, I believe Williams, kind of said there's just a certain number of people who don't trust government. But regardless of how you come down on that, certainly there are people who are concerned that the technology is being used for things that it wasn't intended to be used for. Um, so I told you a little bit about the hot list and about how officers can kind of search that database. And the police officer's standpoint is basically just that the benefits outweigh the the drawbacks, and certainly they'll all acknowledge that humans are the weak link in this. That was one thing that William said several times when I sat down with him at the Stanton Police Department. And yes, this technology can be abused, but as a whole, both Stanton and Harrisonburg said that they feel like, most officers are very trustworthy, and therefore we should be able to use this technology. So, does this camera technology, is this some kind of an invasion of privacy? In the story that I wrote, I say that depends on who you ask. The privacy advocates like the ACLU would say that the US Constitution has protections for not using LPRs. Flock Technology would say that that's been disproved in court. So you can read Flock's statement on AugustaFreePress.com. If you search Flock or Flock cameras, you'll likely find a story that we wrote about that. The understanding about this, the one thing that the ACLU says is that their issue with this is that it's a fundamental right of everybody in this country to be free from arbitrary and excessive invasions of privacy by the state and by police. What these devices do essentially is track everybody's movements on our roads, regardless of whether they're suspected of any crime. Um, there was when this technology, and I won't say specifically Flock, but when license plate reader technology kind of rolled out, there were some instances where even the Virginia State Police used the technology to kind of get people coming in and out of political rallies, on both parties. I mean, it wasn't one-sided. And that was found by the state attorney general to be, to be something that they shouldn't be doing. And eventually, that data was purged after the recommendation of the attorney general in Virginia. And so that kind of thing isn't necessarily happening to our knowledge. The police say that they're not using that anymore. Police Chief Jim Williams said that while it does collect everybody who drives by these cameras, that 99.9% of the data is never looked at by anyone, and is simply purged at the 21-day mark. His quote was, "We don't have any interest in surveilling the citizens of Stanton. What we're trying to do is catch criminals after they've committed offenses. That's the whole purpose." And again, and as a society, we may be a little bit desensitized to the use of cameras, right? Because there's face technology. I went to Jamaica this summer, and there was face technology uh, recognition, kind of technology at the airport. And, in addition to that, there's speed cameras used by law enforcement. I think, in school zones and other places. Harrisonburg definitely utilizes those speed cameras as well. So the ACLU would say, though, that even though you're used to all that, even though you may be desensitized to that, these license plate reader cameras are kind of like another beast altogether. And one of the things that the ACLU says is that a lot of city councils, city governments, police departments, they may kind of give their rubber stamp to technology of this nature, but they may not even realize like how tapped, how plugged in these technologies are and what kind of vulnerabilities that there are with this technology. One thing that a lot of people do point to from all the research that I've done and the people that I spoke with is the fact that this company, Flock Safety, that they're a private company. And so, it's not like that there's one big agency that's kind of overseeing things. Most of the localities are kind of left up on their own devices to set their own policies. Most localities do that. In our case, the state of Virginia has some guidelines in addition to that. I used Harrisonburg as an example because their technology was put in place probably almost 2 years before the city of Stanton's. And again, they have 30 cameras versus Stanton's 6 cameras. I spoke with Police Chief, well, actually, I spoke with a Lieutenant Todd Miller with the Harrisonburg Police Department and also the city's communications director, Michael Parks, regarding that. And one of the things they said is that a former police chief, Kelly Warner, had kind of learned about the flock at a law enforcement conference, brought it back. There was a lot of discussion before they decided to actually implement it. Some people say that one of the problems with the technology is that oftentimes, police departments are offered like almost like a free trial of the technology, and they feel like that's kind of I don't know, like the salesmanship of that is interesting, and the fact that this is marketed primarily to police departments, sheriff's offices, law enforcement. But anyway, the Harrisonburg Police Lieutenant Todd Miller again spoke with us and certainly understands the fear that people may have regarding tracking people down and things of that nature. But what he said is, police departments have limited manpower, and they're certainly not concerned about where you're shopping or what political rally you're attending or anything else. Like basically, their job is to investigate anything criminal, and that's what they're using the technology for. Um, and the communications person said, of course, that they're very careful. They trust their law enforcement officers with the technology, and they know that with any misstep, they could lose the public's trust, especially related to this technology. And the ACLU again said they pointed to these AI tools and other state-of-the-art technology as being one of the issues that they do have a concern with. Harrisonburg admitted that there's probably like a whole lot of options that are offered that they don't use, that they specifically use the cameras. And again, it's for those retroactive searches when a crime is committed. The Harrisonburg would say that it's been very successful for them, and that anybody who has concerns about it are certainly, can reach out to them. And to be fair, Deborah Kushner, who I mentioned at the very beginning of this video, she has reached out to the citizens of Stanton, and they've or sorry, not the citizens of Stanton, the government of Stanton. And the government officials have told her to reach out to Jim Williams directly, which I think they have traded some emails, but she has not taken him up yet on the opportunity to come in and learn a little bit more about the technology, like I was able to do for the story on Augusta Free Press. So, one of the bigger issues is law enforcement playing by the rules, and I talked about that a little bit earlier in the fact that yes, if you're using this for crimes, if you're not looking at the other data, it's probably fine. But there have been instances just with almost any kind of technology where people have misused the technology for one reason or another, and it's not one or two instances. I mean, there's quite a few. And again, because most of these places, like in Stanton, sharing the technology with so many other agencies throughout the state of Virginia, even if, Jim Williams can say, I know my officers are using this for the right reasons, he doesn't know every officer in the state of Virginia, right? And so could any of them be using it for reasons that are not intended? And on top of all that, of course, we mentioned at the very beginning that, that Donald Trump and his administration has really put an emphasis on cracking down on illegal immigration. And even though this technology is not supposed to be used for that reason, there are agencies within the state that have partnered kind of with ICE, which is immigration enforcement, and immigration and custom enforcement. And as a result of that, localities like Charlottesville have said, okay, we recognize that some of our neighboring counties, some of our neighboring jurisdictions are cooperating with ICE. Our leaders don't want to do that. And so this is another way that people can get their local governments perhaps to dial back some of the big brother aspects of the technology. As Charlottesville has said, we're going to limit the technology basically to our department. And what that means is that if a car is stolen in Charlottesville, they can only search for it in the Charlottesville area. They can't do any searches in surrounding jurisdictions. They may be able to reach out to another jurisdiction and have them do the search. I don't know exactly how all of that works, but for most intents and purposes, their technology is limited to the city of Charlottesville, and they can only search cameras in the city of Charlottesville, and therefore neighboring like Greene County, Albemarle County, Augusta County, they don't have access to the data in Charlottesville. So that's another way that because of community pushback, because of concerns over immigration enforcement, and not knowing for sure how other agencies are going to utilize the data, it's something that basically they've decided to do to limit that. Again, I think that the police would say, and they said so in our stories, that, basically they trust their fellow law enforcement officers. So I mentioned that there were things that were done that were perhaps the technology was used the way that it wasn't supposed to be. And certainly, like I said, related to immigration and ICE, there has been I think 4,000 searches nationwide that list immigration, ICE, or something like that as a reason. And I mentioned, of course, the political rallies and the fact that some of that kind of was surveilled. And let's face it, technology makes mistakes, right? In one case, a mother was kind of forced to lay down on concrete because her plate was misread, and it led to, a situation where they thought she was responsible for something that she was not. Another case, an officer released a canine dog on someone, and again, that plate had been misidentified by the system. So there are mistakes in this technology. I think that's probably the case with any kind of technology. I mentioned the Virginia Assembly has addressed the use of this technology. They basically have to do an audit trail. While that's submitted annually to the state, the localities are supposed to look at that every 30 days. And again, it gets reported once a year, kind of to the governor and all of that, all of those folks. And in the case that law enforcement misuses the technology, there are consequences for that. The Code of Virginia now states that it's a class one misdemeanor. A class one misdemeanor can carry a penalty of up to 1 year in jail and a fine of up to $2,500. Um, so, um, The other concern that the ACLU brought up in our conversation is that these systems sometimes get hacked. Again, it's a private company. And so, people have been able to kind of hack into that. Usually, it's not necessarily the way that we think of traditional hacking into it, but just that, a vendor, someone who uses the technology, they let somebody in that they shouldn't, and or that that isn't supposed to have access to that technology. So I mentioned that Charlottesville's doing some things after the pushback and that kind of thing. I did write about that in the story in Augusta Free Press if you want to read about that. I think that gives people like Kushner some hope that maybe she can affect some change in Stanton if she keeps asking questions, and if other people like Kushner continue to ask questions about this. So one of the things, while she would like to see, Stanton discontinue using the flock cameras altogether, the ACLU said that citizens should advocate for things about restricting to the local use, like Charlottesville has done. That cuts off the access beyond the local department. So then again, when people like Stanton says, "I trust my officers," well, that data is then limited to those officers. Another thing that can be done is deleting that non-hit data. So if the vehicle isn't on that hot list for some reason, then that data can be deleted. Maybe not necessarily the 21 days, as Virginia says, but less. New Hampshire actually, I believe, deletes their data within minutes, just as one example. And you can also, limit how much time the data is stored. And the ways that you can do that, of course, are things like Kushner's already doing, speaking to city council, sending letters to the editor, attending public meetings to say that you're unhappy with it. The ACLU says you can also use like social media to write about the issue, to share stories about the issue, and to tag local officials so that it's at the forefront of everyone's mind. I will say that, as I said earlier, the flock safety communications director did reach out to me. One of the things that they said was, despite the ACLU saying that this technology may violate the Constitution, that basically the technology, when it's been challenged in court, typically the opinion has been that it does not violate the Fourth Amendment right to privacy, and it is not considered a search under the Fourth Amendment either. So there are some courts who are saying something different, right? They did say that, despite Stanton and Harrisonburg both telling me they don't really know how to really audit anyone other than the people within their own department. They did say that there is auditing tools built into the system, and so that they can look at that if they choose to. So it may just be that these people that I spoke with didn't know how to do that, not that they don't have the technology to do that. Um, they also said that, when law enforcement works with federal authorities, that is not a back door into flock. That's their choices within the boundaries of law, and to protect the people that they are sworn to serve. So, as part of due diligence, I've included their statement in the story as well. You're welcome to read that. Again, you can go to augustafreepress.com if you want to read the in-depth story, more than 3,000 words that we wrote on the issue. And we'll do follow-ups in the future just to find out if Stanton chooses to make any changes to their technology based on what Charlottesville has done and based on the pushback of people like Kushner. I have a feeling that she's not going to drop this issue anytime soon. And she's not the only one who's speaking out against the technology. Again, I think it's that a lot of people just don't even know that the technology is being used. In Stanton, there are only 6 cameras. And those are at locations in strategic areas throughout the city. Jim Williams gave me those locations. He asked that we not share those locations. I mean, apparently, the information is publicly available, but just not something they want to advertise. If you look at the pictures of these cameras, you can probably easily identify them on roads. I mean, generally speaking, they're just a camera kind of that looks like a solar panel, with a ring camera or like a bird buddy camera or something attached to it. They're usually kind of high up. Sometimes they're attached to light poles or things of that nature. I know in Harrisonburg they did tell me that 28 of their cameras are stationary and 2 of their cameras are mobile. They were not willing to share their locations. They said that they've used basically when they've been FOIA, which is a Freedom of Information Act request, they've said that this is kind of like an investigative kind of tool that the city uses, and therefore that's exempt from FOIA. So they have not shared their locations. But again, these things are probably pretty easy to spot if you know what you're looking for. So if you want to read more about the the flock cameras that are being used in Stanton and Harrisonburg, what law enforcement has to say, more from the ACLU, and again, you can read kind of the statement that comes from flock safety regarding these cameras use as well. That's on AugustaFreePress.com. If you don't see it right on the front page, though it is there, again, you can search flock cameras, license plate reader technology. Any of those key terms should bring up the story that we've written on this. So I appreciate Deborah Kushner reaching out to us regarding this issue and allowing us to find out a little bit more about that and share that with you, our readers. If you have any story ideas at any time for Augusta Free Press, feel free to reach out to us. You can reach out to me directly at crystal@augustafreepress.com. Thanks for listening. Thanks for learning more about this issue with us. And again, we will have follow-ups in the future, especially as we learn more about the technology and how cities are adapting as the technology adapts over time. So for Augusta Free Press, I'm Crystal Graham. Thanks for tuning in.